In March 2019, a fire in a government storage facility outside Houston exposed a secret that NASA had spent 47 years trying to bury. Firefighters discovered a sealed vault containing film reels marked Apollo 21, Eyes Only, Destroy after 2050. The mission didn't exist in any official record. NASA's Apollo program supposedly ended with Apollo 17 in 1972. But the footage was real, showing 3 astronauts landing on the moon's far side in February 1973, and what they found there defied every law of nature. The reels showed structures on the lunar surface, not ancient ruins, but buildings that were clearly new, made from materials that seemed to shift and change in the camera's view, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at for too long. The final reel showed the astronauts entering one of the structures, their helmet cameras recording what lay inside. A chamber filled with thousands of cylindrical containers, each one holding what appeared to be a human fetus suspended in glowing fluid. But these weren't normal human babies. They had extra limbs, eyes in wrong places, and bone structures that belonged to no earthly creature. The lead astronaut's voice on the recording whispered the words that got the mission erased. They're all labeled. Every container has a date and location. These are future births, babies that haven't been born yet, all over Earth, with dates going up to the year 2150. We're not alone up here. Something has been designing humanity's evolution for decades, maybe centuries, and they've been watching us from the moon the whole time. The recording cut to static, and the 3 astronauts never returned to Earth. Officially, they never even left it. The warehouse fire was ruled as arson, and the person who leaked the footage online died in a car accident 2 days later. But thousands had already seen it, and now people are checking birth records, comparing them to the dates visible on those containers. Every single one has matched so far. I watched that footage exactly 41 times before my hands stopped shaking enough to delete it from my laptop. My name is Vincent Hargrove, and 3 weeks ago I was an equipment specialist at a private aerospace contractor in Clear Lake, the kind of job where you calibrate instruments nobody will ever see and sign NDAs that could bury you in federal prison. The kind of job where you keep your head down, collect your paycheck, and don't ask why some of the hardware you're testing has manufacturing dates from 1973. I wasn't supposed to be in Building 7 that Tuesday night, but I'd left my insulin kit in the clean room, and my blood sugar was already doing that thing where colors start bleeding into each other. The security guard who usually worked nights had called in sick. The replacement didn't know me, didn't check my badge properly, just waved me through. That's how I found the locker. Not a locker really, a maintenance panel behind the decontamination chamber, slightly ajar. Inside, a hard drive the size of a cigarette pack, wrapped in layers of static-proof fabric. Unmarked except for a serial number etched so small I needed my phone's flashlight to read it. The serial number matched one I'd seen before. On a requisition form I'd accidentally glimpsed in my supervisor's office, marked with today's date and a single word in red: incinerate. I shoved the hard drive into my jacket pocket and walked out of Building 7 like nothing had happened. The replacement guard was scrolling through his phone, barely looked up. My car was parked in the back lot near the retention pond, where seagulls picked through trash. NASA Road 1 stretched out before me, streetlights painting everything orange. The drive home took 20 minutes. I spent 19 of them convincing myself to throw the damn thing into Galveston Bay. Instead, I pulled into the Shipley Donuts on Bay Area Boulevard and sat in the parking lot, engine idling, watching a drunk couple argue outside a closed pawn shop. My phone buzzed. Text from my supervisor. Equipment audit tomorrow, 6 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. I hadn't been late in 4 years. Back at my apartment, a shoebox studio above a Vietnamese restaurant in Webster, I locked the door, closed the blinds, and set the hard drive on my kitchen table. It sat there like a dead spider. The serial number seemed to catch the light wrong, almost shimmering. My old laptop took 2 minutes to boot up. The hard drive had a standard USB-C connector, which seemed ridiculous for something that might be 50 years old, unless someone had been maintaining it, updating it. 3 folders appeared on screen: footage primary, personnel files, correspondence classified. My cursor hovered over footage primary for longer than I'd like to admit. Part of me knew, has known since I picked the thing up, that opening these files would crack my life down the middle. But humans are curious in the worst ways. We poke dead things with sticks. We lean over railings we shouldn't trust. I clicked. The video player opened. Grainy footage, the kind you see in documentaries about the moon landing. 3 astronauts in bulky suits, the lead one's name patch visible, Holloway. They were descending a ladder onto lunar surface, but the terrain looked wrong, too smooth, almost polished. Then the camera panned up. The structures rose from the moon's surface like crystallized thoughts, translucent, geometric, and wrong. They weren't reflecting light correctly. Shadows fell in directions that defied the sun's position. I watched for 47 minutes, watched them approach, watched them enter, watched them find the cylinders. When the video ended, I discovered I'd been holding my breath. My chest ached from it. That's when someone knocked on my door. 3 sharp raps, purposeful. I slammed the laptop shut, shoved the hard drive under a couch cushion. Through the peephole, a man in his 60s, grey beard, trimmed military short, wearing a windbreaker despite the Houston humidity. He held up a badge too fast for me to read. Vincent Hargrove. I'm Calvin Ortiz. I worked with your father at Johnson Space Center back in the day. Can we talk? My father died in 2003. Aneurysm. Never worked for NASA. He was a high school chemistry teacher in Pasadena. You've got the wrong guy, I said through the door. Your father was Theodore Hargrove. He maintained the capsule simulators in the training facility, 1971 to 1974. Then he took a teaching job and never spoke about those 3 years again. Ortiz's voice dropped lower. You found something tonight. Something with a serial number. I'm here because that hard drive has a dead man's switch. Open it, and certain people get alerted. You've got maybe 2 hours before they arrive. What do you want? To show you something before they clean this mess up, before they bury you like they buried your old man. He paused. There's a reason your father never talked about NASA. Same reason he moved you and your mother to Pasadena, changed jobs, started drinking. He saw things in those simulators, things that didn't belong in training equipment. I didn't open the door. If they're coming anyway, why should I trust you? Because 30 years ago I helped erase 16 people from existence, good people who asked the wrong questions. I'm trying to do one decent thing before I die. He pulled out a phone, tapped the screen, held it to the peephole. This was taken in 1973, Building 16, Johnson Space Center. The photo showed 3 men in lab coats standing beside what looked like a medical pod. Inside the pod, something that might have been human once. Extra joints in the arms, ribs that curved outward like insect wings. One of the men in lab coats was younger, thinner, but unmistakably my father. There's a warehouse in Lamarck, Ortiz said. Old Boeing facility, abandoned since 2011. Inside there's equipment from the Apollo 21 prep work. Things they couldn't destroy because they didn't understand how to shut them down safely. If we leave now, you'll understand what you're really looking at on that hard drive. I checked my phone. 11:47 p.m. The audit was in 6 hours. My supervisor never scheduled audits. Ever. How do I know you're not one of them? Ortiz laughed, but it sounded like a cough. If I was, you'd already be in a bag. They don't do conversations anymore. Not after Houston. He turned to leave, stopped. Your father used to say something near the end, when the bourbon got to him. The moon isn't watching us. We're watching ourselves from up there. Never understood what he meant, not until I saw the personnel files. He walked down the hallway. I watched through the peephole until he disappeared down the stairwell. The hard drive sat under the cushion like a tumor. I grabbed my keys and followed him. Ortiz drove a '98 Ford Ranger that smelled like cigarettes and old vinyl. We headed south on Iron 45, past the refineries that lit up the night sky like Christmas had caught fire. He didn't speak for the first 15 minutes. Just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on something in his jacket pocket. Tell me about the footage, he finally said. You already know what's on it. I know what I saw in 1989 when they let me into the archive room, before they sealed it permanently. before Houston. He glanced at me. But technology changes. They've been updating those files, adding things. I need to know what version you got. The highway light strobed across his face. Something about his jaw was wrong, asymmetrical, like one side had been reconstructed. 3 astronauts, structures on the far side, some kind of nursery. The word felt ridiculous saying it out loud. Containers with dates on them, future births. Ortiz nodded slowly. Did you see the timestamps? What? On the containers. The dates weren't just when the babies would be born. They had timestamps, down to the minute. He merged onto Highway 6, heading toward the coast. Your father figured it out in 1973, that's why they transferred him out. The timestamps were too precise, too specific, like someone had already witnessed those births happen. That's impossible. Yeah, that's what everyone keeps saying. He smiled without humor. Right up until they check the birth records and find perfect matches. Every single one. We passed a 24-hour taco truck, then abandoned storefronts, then nothing but darkness and marsh grass. The ranger's headlights carved a tunnel through the night. Something large and pale flashed across the road, maybe a deer, maybe not, and Ortiz didn't even flinch. The warehouse is another 10 minutes, he said. When we get there, don't touch anything metal. Don't look directly into any of the pods if they're still active. And for Christ's sake, don't let any liquid get on your skin. What liquid? You'll know it when you see it. He pulled off onto a county road that wasn't on any map I remembered. Gravel crunched under the tires. Through the trees, I could see the outline of something massive, a building that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Boeing facility had been abandoned for years, but someone had been maintaining it. The chain-link fence was new, topped with fresh razor wire. The gate stood open. Shouldn't that be locked? I asked. It was. 2 hours ago, Ortiz killed the engine. Means someone else got here first. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a flashlight. Not a phone light, an actual heavy-duty torch that looked military issue. Then he handed me something else, a small device that looked like a pager from the 90s. Radiation detector, he said. If it clicks faster than your pulse, run back to the truck. Jesus Christ, what is this place? Officially? Surplus storage for aircraft parts. Unofficially? This is where they brought the lunar samples that didn't make sense, the equipment they couldn't explain, the stuff that kept working after the mission ended even though it shouldn't have had any power source. He opened his door. Stay close. The warehouse loomed ahead, a corrugated metal cathedral of rust and secrets. Someone had painted over the Boeing logo, but you could still see the outline underneath. The main door was ajar, another bad sign. Inside, the smell hit first, ozone and something organic, like meat left in a hot car. Our flashlights revealed rows of equipment covered in canvas tarps. Ortiz moved between them with the confidence of someone who'd been here before, pulling back covers to reveal machines I didn't recognize. Control panels with switches labeled in languages that weren't quite English. Monitoring stations with screens that still displayed readouts despite having no visible power supply. And in the back corner, something that made my detector start clicking. 3 pods, each one roughly the size of a phone booth made from a material that seemed to shift between metal and glass depending on the angle. Inside each pod, liquid that glowed faintly blue, and suspended in that liquid. Don't look too long, Ortiz warned, but I'd already seen them. 3 figures, human-shaped but wrong, extra vertebrae creating S-curves in the spine, fingers that branched into too many joints, faces that were almost normal except for the way the skull curved back, extending into shapes that served no earthly purpose. These were the test subjects, Ortiz said quietly. Before Apollo 21, they needed to see if humans could survive whatever process was happening up there. So they built these pods based on salvaged technology from early Apollo missions, equipment that came back different than when it left. Put volunteers inside, military guys mostly, told them it was radiation testing. What happened to them? They changed, slowly at first. Extra bone growth, neurological restructuring. By month 3, They weren't exactly human anymore. Smarter, maybe. Different. The project director called it accelerated adaptation. Your father called it something else. What? Previews. Ortiz moved to a filing cabinet nearby, started rifling through folders. He thought the moon structures weren't creating these mutations. They were showing us what we're supposed to become. What we're going to become, whether we like it or not. The radiation detector was clicking steadily now, not dangerous yet, but getting louder. Here. Ortiz pulled out a file, handed it to me. Inside, photographs of the Apollo 21 crew. Not the official NASA portraits you'd see in history books. These were candid shots, taken after their return. Except according to every record, they never returned. The photos showed 3 men in a medical facility, strapped to tables, their bodies in various stages of transformation, the same elongated bone structures I was seeing in the pods. They came back, I said. The astronauts came back. For about 6 hours, then they started changing. NASA quarantined them in a facility that officially doesn't exist. By day 2, they weren't human enough to kill. By day 5, they weren't human enough to communicate with. By day 7. He trailed off. The footage you have probably doesn't show this part. Where are they now? Depends on which rumor you believe. Some say they're still in quarantine somewhere under Johnson Space Center. Others say they were launched back to the moon in an unmanned capsule in 1974. And some people, the ones who worked the night shift in Building 16, they say the astronauts never left. That they're still here, changed so much we don't recognize them as human anymore, walking among us. A sound echoed from deeper in the warehouse, metal scraping against concrete. Ortiz's hand moved to his jacket pocket again. We need to leave. Now. What was that? Could be the building settling, could be rats. He started walking quickly toward the exit. Could be someone who doesn't want us sharing what we've found. I followed, clutching the file. Behind us, the sound came again, closer this time, and underneath it, something that might have been breathing, if breathing could sound mechanical and wet at the same time. We were 20 feet from the door when the lights came on, not regular lights. These were harsh, surgical, flooding the warehouse with brightness that bleached all color away. And standing between us and the exit, a man in a dark suit, hands clasped behind his back. He smiled. Mr. Hargrove, Mr. Ortiz, we've been waiting. 3 more figures emerged from the shadows, not quite moving right, not quite shaped right. The detector in my hand was screaming now. The man in the suit didn't blink. That was the first thing I noticed. He just stood there, smiling, eyes fixed on us with the intensity of someone watching insects under glass. You can shut off that detector, Vincent. The radiation won't harm you. Not anymore. His voice was smooth, practiced. You've been exposed to trace amounts for 4 years now. Every piece of equipment you've calibrated, every clean room you've entered, we've been preparing you. Fuck you, I said. The detector was screaming so loud it hurt. The man's smile widened. That's your father talking. He had the same initial reaction. Quite the temper, Theodore. Before we helped him understand. Ortiz moved slightly to my left, his hand still in his jacket pocket. Baylor, didn't expect them to send you. Thought they'd retired you after the incident in Atlanta. Retirement isn't really an option in our line of work, Calvin. You of all people should understand that. Baylor gestured to the 3 figures behind him. You remember the Houston crew, don't you? From '89? The figures stepped into the harsh light. They wore business casual, khakis, button-ups, but their movements were wrong. Joints bending at angles that shouldn't exist, heads tilting in directions that made my vision blur. One of them had been a woman once, I think. Now they were something else entirely. They've adapted beautifully, Baylor continued. Fully functional in society. They hold jobs, pay taxes, even have families. The next generation is, well, you've seen the footage. You know what's coming. Ortiz pulled his hand from his pocket. Not a gun, a road flare. He struck it against the concrete floor, and the warehouse exploded in red light. Run! I didn't think, just moved. The detector fell from my hands as I bolted toward a side door I'd noticed earlier. Behind me, sounds I don't have words for. Wet and mechanical simultaneously. Ortiz screaming something that might have been my name. The side door was locked. I slammed my shoulder against it once, twice. On the third impact, something grabbed my jacket and yanked me backward. One of the transformed crew members. Up close, I could see where human features ended and something else began. The eyes were still recognizably human, but there were too many muscles around them, creating expressions that conveyed meanings I couldn't interpret. Its mouth opened. "You're hurting yourself," it said in a voice like wind through copper pipes. "This doesn't have to be traumatic." I swung wild, connected with what might have been a face. My knuckles split open. The thing didn't even flinch, just cocked its head with curiosity. Then Ortiz was there, shoving the lit flare into the creature's midsection. The smell was immediate and wrong, burning plastic mixed with rotting fish. The creature stumbled backward, and Ortiz grabbed my arm. "The pods!" he gasped. "Break the pods!" We ran toward the 3 chambers containing the test subjects. Baylor was shouting orders now, his calm facade cracking. The other transformed crew members were converging. Ortiz reached the first pod and slammed the flare against the glass metal surface. Nothing happened. Shit! He tried again, harder. The material didn't crack. Didn't even scratch. But something inside the pod moved. The floating figure's eyes opened. After decades, after whatever impossible sleep they'd been in, they opened. And they were the same color as mine. "No," I whispered. Ortiz saw it too. He stepped back, the flare trembling in his hand. "Vincent, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't." "The subjects weren't volunteers," Baylor said from behind us. He was flanked now by all 3 transformed crew members. They were family members, children of program insiders. We needed genetic compatibility. Your father agreed to it in exchange for certain assurances. The figure in the pod, my age, my build, my goddamn eyes, pressed a hand against the interior surface. 7 fingers splayed out. Bone growth that looked like it had taken years to develop. "That's impossible. I'm right here. You're the control group, Vincent. The one we didn't put in the pod. We needed to compare outcomes. See how much of the change was environmental versus genetic predisposition." Baylor approached slowly, hands raised in mock surrender. "Your brother wasn't so lucky." "Well, lucky and unlucky, depending on your perspective. He's been asleep for 32 years, but he's alive, still changing, even in stasis. The moon structures accelerate certain biological inevitabilities. Your brother is showing us your future." "My brother. I was an only child. Mum always said there were complications with my birth, that I was their miracle. Their only miracle. Except she'd been lying. They'd both been lying." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Because the structures aren't alien, Vincent. They're human. From a future we haven't reached yet. They're reaching backward through time, preparing us for what's coming. The mutations aren't contamination, they're upgrades. Necessary adaptations for survival in the next phase." Baylor was close now. Too close. "The Apollo 21 crew didn't find some alien nursery. They found a temporal facility, a place where future humans are cultivating their own past. And your bloodline. You're part of the genetic template they're working from." Ortiz moved fast. He grabbed me and shoved something into my hand, a key ring with a single key. "Building 16, Johnson Space Center, underground level. Your father left something there, something they never found." He turned to face Baylor. "Go!" "Calvin, don't be dramatic." But Ortiz was already moving. He charged at Baylor, the flare still burning in his hand. One of the transformed crew members intercepted him, and they went down in a tangle of limbs that bent wrong. The flare rolled across the floor, painting everything in shades of blood. I ran. The side door gave on my first kick, adrenaline doing what desperation couldn't. Behind me, sounds of struggle, Ortiz shouting, something tearing in ways that human bodies don't tear. I made it to the Ranger, keys still in the ignition. Ortiz had been prepared for this possibility. As I peeled out of the gravel lot, I saw them in the rearview mirror. Baylor and his crew standing at the warehouse entrance, not chasing, just watching. The transformed ones moved with that eerie synchronization, their heads all tilting at the same angle. And behind them, through the open door, I could see the pods, all three of them glowing brighter now. The figures inside were waking up. I drove without thinking, taking back roads I barely remembered from high school. The keyring Ortiz gave me dug into my palm. A single key, brass, with a number etched into it, B16-SB4. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Your father knew you'd come back eventually. He left instructions. Be at building 16 by 6 a.m. Come alone. Come prepared. The audit isn't about equipment." Another text, this one a photo. My apartment, taken from inside. My laptop open on the table, the hard drive visible beside it. They'd already been there. I pulled over on the shoulder of Highway 146, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. In the distance, the lights of Johnson Space Center glowed against the night sky. Somewhere under those buildings my father had left something, some truth buried so deep they'd spent 40 years trying to keep it hidden. And Ortiz Christ, Ortiz. I'd left him there, with those things. My phone buzzed again. Another photo. This one showed the warehouse interior, the lights still blazing. Ortiz on the ground, surrounded by the transformed crew. But he wasn't torn apart like I'd expected. He was sitting up and his arms were beginning to change, elongating. Additional joints forming in real time. The text underneath. He knew this would happen. He's been exposed too long, just like your father, just like you. The only question is whether you fight it or embrace it. Come to building 16. Learn what you really are. I threw the phone out the window, watched it shatter on the pavement. But I couldn't throw away the key. Couldn't throw away the image of that figure in the pod. My brother. My genetic mirror, showing me what I was supposed to become. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, dawn coming, the audit scheduled for 6 a.m. I had 2 hours to decide if I was going to show up. 2 hours to decide if I wanted to know the truth about what my father had done, what I was becoming, and why they'd spent my entire life preparing me for something I couldn't even imagine. I put the Ranger in drive and headed toward Clear Lake. Toward Johnson Space Center, toward whatever was waiting in Building 16's sub-basement, the only building my father had ever explicitly told me to stay away from. Johnson Space Center at 4:47 a.m. looked like a corporate campus having a nervous breakdown. Half the lights were out. Security vehicles circled the perimeter in patterns that seemed more anxious than routine. I parked the Ranger in the visitor lot of the Space Center Houston Museum across the street, killed the engine, and watched. The guard station at the main gate was empty. That couldn't be right. JSC never left the gates unattended. Not since 9/11. Not ever. I waited another 10 minutes. Nothing moved except the security vehicles making their loops. Then I noticed something. They weren't random. Every vehicle followed the exact same route, down to the second. Like a looped animation. Like someone had automated the patrol just to maintain appearances. The back entrance near the neutral buoyancy lab had a gap in the fence I remembered from my contractor orientation 4 years ago. Nobody had bothered fixing it because it required wading through a drainage ditch that usually contained snakes and chemical runoff. At 5 a.m, I didn't give a damn about snakes. The water came up to my knees. Something brushed against my leg and I kept moving, eyes fixed on Building 16's silhouette against the pre-dawn sky. The building looked like every other structure on campus. Beige, anonymous, covered in warnings about authorized personnel only. But I'd never been inside. My clearance level had always mysteriously excluded it. The service entrance was locked. I used the key Ortiz had given me. It shouldn't have worked. Wrong building, wrong lock type. But it slid in smooth and the door opened with a click that sounded too loud. Inside, maintenance corridor. Pipes along the ceiling. Concrete floors. The smell of industrial cleaner mixed with something sweeter, like flowers left too long in a closed room. Emergency lighting cast everything in green. The key had a number etched on it. B16-S-B4. Sub-basement 4. I found the stairwell access and descended. Each level down felt colder. By sub-basement 2, I could see my breath. By sub-basement 3, ice was forming in the corners where pipes met walls. This deep underground, in Houston summer, ice shouldn't exist. Sub-basement 4's door required a keycard I didn't have. But next to the reader was a manual override panel, and when I tried my father's birth date, something I'd memorized from filling out insurance forms after he died, the lock disengaged. He'd programmed his own birthday as the failsafe, even in death still leaving me breadcrumbs. The corridor beyond stretched into darkness that the emergency lights barely touched. Along the walls, windows. And behind those windows, laboratories that hadn't been used in decades. Equipment covered in dust. Computer terminals with screens that had burned permanent ghosts into their displays. One lab had the door propped open with a fire extinguisher. Inside, filing cabinets lined every wall. I pulled open the nearest drawer. Personnel files. Dozens of them. Names I didn't recognize. Photos of men in military uniforms from the 70s. Medical records documenting transformations that should have killed them. Experiment. Subject 17, Jerome Fitzpatrick, exposed to lunar sample 15,782. Day 4, additional vertebrae growth confirmed. Day 11, subject reports seeing colors that don't exist in visible spectrum. Day 19, subject attempting to communicate in language composed entirely of mathematical ratios. Day 23, termination approved, termination failed. Subject no longer responds to conventional weapons. Current status contained. I kept reading, kept finding the same outcome. Dozens of subjects, all transformed, all supposedly terminated, all marked as contained with no explanation of where or how. The last file in the drawer stopped me. Subject 31, Theodore Hargrove, voluntary exposure. Day 1, no observable changes. Day 7, subject reports dreams of being in 2 places simultaneously. Day 14, minor skeletal adjustments detected. Day 21, subject experiencing temporal perception shifts, claims to remember events that haven't occurred yet. Day 30, subject removed from testing, false medical discharge arranged, subject relocated to Pasadena under observation. Long-term monitoring approved. My father had been a test subject, not just an observer, not just a maintenance tech who saw something he shouldn't have. He'd volunteered to be transformed, and he'd stopped the process somehow, or they'd stopped it. There was a handwritten note paperclipped to his file. Subject's son, born 3 months after exposure cessation. Recommend monitoring offspring for delayed manifestation. See attached genetic markers. I'd been monitored my entire life, every job interview, every medical exam, every goddamn dentist appointment. They'd been watching me, waiting to see if whatever had started changing my father would emerge in me. Footsteps echoed from somewhere in the corridor, multiple sets moving with purpose. I shoved the file into my jacket and moved deeper into the sub-basement away from the stairwell. The corridor branched. I took the left path, following signs that pointed toward secure storage, authorized access only. The door at the end required the key again. Inside, not a storage room, an observation deck. And below, through reinforced glass, a chamber the size of a basketball court. 7 pods. Not 3, 7. And they were all occupied. The closest one held someone I recognized from the Apollo 21 footage, Commander Holloway, or what was left of him. His body had elongated to nearly 8 feet, bone structures creating frameworks for organs that didn't exist in any anatomy textbook. But his face was still partially human, eyes still capable of awareness. And he was awake. All of them were awake. They weren't floating peacefully like the test subjects at the warehouse. They were moving inside their pods, pressing against the surfaces, mouths opening and closing in speech I couldn't hear through the glass. Behind each pod, monitoring equipment that was still active, still recording. Displays showing data streams that updated in real time. A speaker crackled above me. Not Baylor's voice, This one was older, rougher, like gravel being sorted. "Hello, Vincent. Been a long time since anyone came down here who wasn't supposed to." I spun around. Behind me, sitting in an observation chair I'd somehow missed. An old man in a wheelchair, oxygen tank connected to nasal cannula, hands twisted with arthritis. But the eyes were sharp, recognizing me in the same moment I recognized him. "Dad?" Theodore Hargrove smiled. The same crooked smile from every childhood memory, now set in a face that had aged 30 years since his funeral. Not quite. Close enough, though. He gestured at the pods below. "They told you I died in 2003. Aneurysm. Very sudden. Tragic. Truth is, I've been down here the whole time, observing, recording, trying to understand what they did to us. My throat had closed up. Words weren't happening. The funeral was real," he continued. "Body in the casket and everything, just not my body. One of the failed subjects who looked close enough after some cosmetic work. Your mother knew, part of the deal. She got to keep you away from this, and I got to keep watching over these poor bastards." He rolled his wheelchair forward, pointing at the pods. "They're not prisoners, Vincent. They're volunteers. Still volunteers even now. They want to complete the transformation, want to become what the moon structures are designing us to be. Why didn't you? Because I saw what you'd lose. Your humanity isn't just your shape, son. It's your limitations, your fear, your ability to be wrong. These men in these pods, they don't feel fear anymore. Don't feel much of anything except this drive to evolve. And evolution doesn't give a damn about the individual." He coughed, wet and painful. "I kept myself at partial transformation. Enough to survive, not enough to lose who I was. Been costing me for 30 years. This body's falling apart in ways that would baffle any normal doctor." "Ortiz said you left something here, instructions. I left you a choice." He pressed a button on his wheelchair's armrest. Below us, machinery activated. The pods began to drain. "In about 5 minutes, these 7 men are going to wake up fully. They're going to walk out of here and rejoin society. They have jobs waiting, identities, families who think they've been in classified military operations. They're going to have children, and those children will be born already halfway transformed. The process is accelerating with each generation. How do I stop it? You don't. You can't. This isn't an invasion, Vincent. It's inevitability, but you can choose whether you guide it or whether you let it happen blind. Those are the instructions I left you." He handed me a small data stick. "Everything I've learned about managing partial transformation, how to slow it, how to keep your mind intact while your body changes. You've already started, you just don't feel it yet. That radiation at work, those years of exposure, it's in your cells now, rewriting you one nucleotide at a time." Below us, the first pod opened. Commander Holloway stepped out on legs that bent in too many places, but he stood. He turned his head up toward the observation deck, those almost human eyes finding mine, and he waved. Commander Holloway's wave was deliberate, almost friendly, like we were colleagues meeting at a conference instead of a man watching another man emerge from 30 years of forced evolution. The other pods opened in sequence, releasing figures that moved with grace that shouldn't be possible given their reconstructed anatomies. "They remember you," my father said. "Not directly, but genetically. Your DNA is close enough to mine that they recognize you as family, as part of the program. I never asked for this. Nobody did. That's the point." He coughed again, his body shaking. "Choice is an illusion we tell ourselves to feel better about inevitability. You think you're here because of decisions you made? You've been on rails since conception. The moment your mother got pregnant 3 months after my exposure, your fate was sealed." Below us, the transformed crew were dressing in clothes that had been waiting for them. Suits, casual wear, all tailored to their new proportions. They moved like they'd been practicing, muscle memory intact despite the decades in stasis. Where do they go now? Baylor has assignments ready, corporate positions mostly, places where their enhanced cognition will be useful. One of them is scheduled to start at SpaceX next week, another at a genetic research firm in Boston. They'll live normal lives mostly, have relationships. The discomfort people feel around them will be written off as social awkwardness. The physical differences explained away as genetic conditions. In 10 years, nobody will remember what baseline human was supposed to look like. I pulled out my father's file, threw it on the floor between us. You volunteered. You knew what would happen, and you did it anyway. I was 28 years old, and they told me I'd be helping humanity reach the stars, that the Apollo missions had discovered something that would change everything. They weren't lying. His eyes met mine. The structures on the moon aren't ruins, Vincent. They're embryonic, growing, preparing for our arrival. Future humans built them, yes, but not as a gift, as a necessity. Something happens to Earth, something catastrophic. The only humans who survive are the ones who've already started adapting. What happens? The data stick has projections, best estimates based on what the structures showed us, but knowing doesn't change the outcome. We adapt or we die. Those are the options. He rolled his wheelchair closer to the glass. Your brother in that warehouse. He's 3 months ahead of you in the transformation timeline. They accelerated his process to see what happens. You're the control, the natural progression. They want to see which method produces better results. Something in my left hand cramped. I looked down and saw the skin between my thumb and index finger was darker. Not bruised, just denser. Like the cellular structure was compressing, reinforcing. It's starting, my father said. The radiation exposure is reaching critical mass. You'll feel it in your joints next, then your spine. Your perception will start shifting. You'll notice sounds you couldn't hear before, colors that seem slightly off from what you remember. How do I stop it? You don't. You manage it. The data stick has protocols, exercises that slow the cognitive changes, keep your emotional range intact while your body rebuilds itself. It's not perfect. You'll still lose things, but you'll stay yourself longer than these poor bastards did. A door opened somewhere on the lower level. Baylor emerged, flanked by his transformed crew. They moved through the chamber like they owned it, nodding at the newly awakened Apollo 21 team. Greetings between old colleagues. A reunion of monsters. Baylor looked up at the observation deck. Even from here, I could see him smile. Your father's been quite helpful over the years, his voice boomed through the speaker system, providing data, running tests. He's the reason we've perfected the process, the reason we know exactly how much exposure creates optimal results. My father's expression didn't change. Sometimes you work with the devil to buy time. I needed you to think I was compliant, needed access to this facility. To do what exactly? Leave your son a thumb drive with information we've already given him? Theodore, you've been predictable from the start. Baylor gestured, and his crew began moving toward the observation deck access stairs. We arranged for Vincent to find that hard drive. We wanted him to see the footage, to understand what was coming. Ortiz was our insurance. If Vincent didn't react appropriately, Ortiz would push him in the right direction. Ortiz was a true believer, my father snapped. Ortiz was desperate. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. We offered him transformation as a cure. He would have done anything. Baylor was climbing the stairs now, his crew behind him. And now Vincent is here, exactly where we need him. The audit starts in 43 minutes. All your co-workers will arrive to find you in this observation room, watching as our transformed colleagues rejoin society. You'll be given a choice: transform willingly and maintain your position, or resist and spend the rest of your shortened life in a containment cell. My father leaned forward in his wheelchair. Or option 3. He pressed another button on the armrest. Below us, something ignited. Not fire, light. Pure white light that seemed to erase everything it touched. The pods that had held the transformed crew began to crack, and the light poured out. It was the same light from the footage, the same impossible illumination from inside the lunar structures. The pods aren't just stasis chambers, my father said. They're receivers. Quantum entangled with the structures on the moon. Break the connection violently enough, and you create a feedback loop. The structures feel it, and they respond. The light was spreading, climbing the walls, eating through the reinforced glass of the observation deck. Baylor was shouting orders now, his crew retreating, but the light moved faster, catching one of them. The transformed crew member seized, body contorting, the evolutionary changes reversing in seconds. Bone retracting, organs repositioning, screaming as 30 years of adaptation unwound in moments. Then he collapsed, just a man again, dead from the shock of being human too, suddenly. "You'll kill them all," I said. "I'll kill the ones who are already too far gone. The ones who can't come back." My father's hand was steady on the button. "But you're early enough. The feedback might purge what started in your cells, reset you." "Might? 60-40 odds, better than the alternative." He coughed blood into his hand. "I'm dead either way. This body's held together by sheer spite, but you still have a chance." Baylor had reached the observation deck door. He didn't knock, just activated some override, and the door slid open. His suit was singed from the light, but he was still standing, still smiling that terrible smile. "Theodore, you sentimental fool, we accounted for this scenario. Do you really think we'd let you have access to the pod controls without safeguards?" He pulled out a tablet, tapped the screen. Below, the light began to retract. "The connection to the lunar structures has been severed remotely. All you've done is kill poor Daniel and given your son a lethal dose of quantum radiation." I felt it then, in my chest, something unspooling. My heartbeat stuttering, skipping rhythms that felt mechanical rather than biological. "Vincent, listen to me," my father said. His voice was fading. "The data stick, inside Building 7. There's a clean room we used for early Apollo experiments. Equipment we salvaged before the moon structures activated fully. It can generate a counter-frequency, might stabilize you, might dash quote. Might kill him faster," Baylor interrupted. "The equipment Theodore's referring to is 40 years out of date. We've tried using it. Every subject died within hours." My father grabbed my wrist. His hand was hot, feverish. "Better to die human than live as whatever they're turning you into. Better to—" He stopped. His eyes went wide. Blood ran from his nose, his ears. The partial transformation he'd maintained for 3 decades was finally failing. His body couldn't decide what it was supposed to be anymore. "Dad, run!" he whispered, then louder with the last of his strength. "Run! God damn it!" He threw himself forward, wheelchair and all, slamming into Baylor. They went down in a heap. The tablet skittered across the floor. I grabbed it, saw the controls for the pod system, the quantum connection, everything. My father had given me one last gift, access. Baylor's transformed crew was at the door. I had maybe 5 seconds. I tapped the screen, looking for anything that could help. Found a file labeled Emergency Protocols. Inside, instructions for forced reversal, for containment, for... There. Quantum purge, full facility. A warning appeared. "This action will sever all quantum connections and irradiate the entire building. Estimated survival, 0%. Proceed?" Behind me, my father was losing his fight with Baylor. The transformed crew members were pulling him off, holding him down. My father's body was changing now, accelerating, decades of resistance collapsing in seconds. He saw me looking at the tablet, saw what I'd found, and he smiled. "Do it," he mouthed. I pressed the button. The light returned, but different this time. Violent, angry. It consumed everything. The pods, the observation deck, Baylor and his crew. They screamed, all of them, human and transformed alike. The light didn't discriminate. I ran. Back through the corridor, up the stairs, my body doing things it shouldn't be able to do. I took 4 stairs at a time, muscles working with efficiency that felt alien. By the time I reached sub-basement 2, the building was shaking. By sub-basement 1, alarms were screaming. I burst through the service entrance as Building 16 lit up like a second sun. The light poured from every window, every door, transforming the pre-dawn darkness into sterile noon. Then it collapsed inward. The whole building just imploded. dropped into its own footprint like a controlled demolition, dust and debris rising into the air. Behind me, security vehicles were converging. Real ones now, not the automated loops. People were shouting, radios crackling with confused reports. I still had the data stick my father gave me, and I still had the tablet, though its screen was cracked and flickering. My left hand was almost completely changed now, darker, denser, fingers elongating slightly at the joints. The transformation was accelerating. Building 7 was 300 yards away. If my father was right, there was equipment there that might save me, might kill me. 60-40 odds. I started running and nobody tried to stop me. They were all staring at the crater where Building 16 used to be, where my father had just deleted himself and everyone else from existence. In the distance, the sun was rising over Clear Lake, first light catching the water, turning it gold. It might be the last sunrise I ever saw as myself. Building 7 looked like every other structure on the Johnson Space Center campus, bureaucratic, beige, forgettable. But I knew it differently now. Every calibration I'd performed there over 4 years had been preparing me for this moment. Every piece of equipment I'd touched had been slowly rewriting my cells. The main entrance was locked down, security protocols activated by Building 16's implosion. But the loading dock around back was still open, trucks arriving for early morning deliveries. I slipped in behind a man carrying boxes of printer paper, badge visible enough that he didn't question me. Inside, the familiar smell of industrial cleaning solution mixed with ozone from the equipment labs. My badge still worked at the first checkpoint. The guard barely glanced up from his phone, waving me through with the exhaustion of someone working a double shift. The clean room was on the 3rd floor. I took the stairs because elevators meant cameras, meant questions I couldn't answer with my left hand looking like it belonged on something that wasn't quite human anymore. Each flight up, my body felt lighter, stronger, bones restructuring themselves to be more efficient, muscles finding leverages that shouldn't exist. I was becoming what my father had fought against for 3 decades, and it was happening in hours, not years. The clean room required a code I'd memorized years ago during training. I punched it in, and the heavy door unsealed with a hiss. Inside, the familiar white walls, the air filtration systems humming, and in the back corner behind plastic sheeting, equipment I'd been told was decommissioned, quarantined because of suspected chemical contamination. Lies, obviously, all of it lies. I pulled back the sheeting and found machines that looked like they'd been assembled by someone who understood physics differently than the rest of humanity. Curved surfaces that hurt the eyes when viewed at certain angles. Control panels with symbols that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The data stick my father gave me had instructions. I plugged it into my phone, pulled up the files. Dense technical documentation, but my father had included a simplified guide titled, "For Vincent, When the Time Comes." The equipment was a quantum resonator built from salvaged materials the Apollo 11 crew had brought back in 1969. Not moon rocks for research, parts. Components from something they'd found and dismantled before NASA understood what they were dealing with. The resonator could theoretically generate a counter-frequency to the quantum entanglement that connected transformed humans to the lunar structures. Theoretically. My father's notes were blunt. Success rate in testing was 11%. The other 89% suffered catastrophic cellular collapse. But it's the only option besides accepting what you'll become. I'm sorry I couldn't offer you better odds, son. 11%, less than 60-40. He'd lied to make me feel better in those final moments. I started powering up the equipment according to the instructions, switches that felt wrong under my fingers, like touching geometry that existed in more dimensions than 3. The resonator began to hum, a sound that vibrated in my bones rather than my ears. That's when I noticed I wasn't alone. A man stood in the clean room entrance, not Baylor. This one was younger, maybe 40, wearing the same contractor uniform I had on. His badge read, James Torrance, Senior Technician. I'd seen him around, had lunch in the same cafeteria a dozen times. Nice guy. Always had photos of his kids on his desk, except his neck had that same density I'd seen developing in my hand. The skin was darker, tighter, and his eyes caught the fluorescent light wrong, reflecting it back with an iridescence that didn't belong in human biology. "Vincent," he said. His voice sounded normal. Almost. "You shouldn't be here. Neither should you. Building 7 was supposed to be evacuated after the implosion. I'm not here because of the evacuation order." He stepped into the room, movements too fluid. "I'm here because they told me you'd come here eventually. Your father's last desperate play. They? The ones who understand what we're becoming. The ones who've already accepted it." He gestured at the resonator. "That machine won't save you, Vincent. It'll just kill you slower. I've seen what happens when someone tries to reverse the process. Watch Daniel die down there because your father wanted to prove a point. Daniel chose this, I didn't. Nobody chooses their birth. Nobody chooses their DNA. This is just the next step." James moved closer, and I could see more changes now. Extra muscles in his forearms creating strength that would show up on no anatomical chart. "I was like you 6 months ago, terrified, fighting it. Then I stopped fighting and everything became clear. The fear goes away. The confusion. You just understand." "Understand what?" "That humanity isn't dying. It's upgrading. The structures on the moon are archives. Every possible human configuration, tested and catalogued across timelines we can't perceive yet. Some versions of us die out in the next century, wars, climate collapse, plague, but the versions that make it through, they're the ones who started adapting now. We're not losing ourselves, Vincent. We're saving the species." The resonator was at 40% power. I needed 5 more minutes. "My father spent 30 years fighting this. If it was so wonderful, why did he resist?" "Because he was afraid of losing you. Afraid you'd look at him and see a monster. So he tortured himself, kept himself in that halfway state, suffering every day just to stay recognizable. James was close enough now that I could smell him. Not unpleasant, just different, like copper and ozone. But you saw him at the end. Saw him lose control. That's what happens when you fight inevitability. You don't stay human, Vincent. You just break. 60% power," the humming was getting louder. "How many others?" I asked. "How many people working here are already changed?" "Enough. We're integrated into every major aerospace program, every government agency that matters. When we're ready, the reveal won't be traumatic. It'll just be Tuesday. People will adapt because they won't have a choice. And within 2 generations, baseline humans will be the minority. Obsolete. 75%. My fingers were shaking. Or maybe they weren't. Maybe they were just operating on frequencies my brain couldn't properly interpret anymore. "And if I refuse? If I use this machine? Then you die. Painfully. And we continue without you. Your bloodline is useful but not essential. Your brother at the warehouse will provide the genetic data we need." James tilted his head. "Or you join us. Stop the machine. Let the change complete. You'll still be you, Vincent. Just better, clearer. The first few weeks are disorienting, but then you'll wonder why you ever wanted to be limited." The resonator hit 90%. A targeting system activated, laser grid appearing in the air, mapping the room for optimal frequency distribution. I'd need to stand in the center of the grid when it reached full power. I watched my father die rather than become what you are. Your father died because he was stubborn and broken. Don't make his mistakes. James reached out, and I saw his fingers had developed that 7-digit configuration I'd seen in the pods. We're not enemies, Vincent. We're family. Genetic cousins preparing for a future that's already written. The structures on the moon aren't predictions. They're recordings. This has already happened. We're just following the script. 95%. The humming was loud enough now that security would hear it. Time was running out. I thought about my father's face in those final moments. The relief when I'd pressed the button. He'd chosen death as a human over life as something else. Made that choice knowing it would hurt. Knowing it would cost me the only parent I had left. But he'd also left me this machine, this 11% chance. Maybe he knew I'd be too stubborn to accept the alternative. Maybe he was betting I'd inherited his desperate need to stay recognizable, even if it killed me. 100%. The laser grid solidified, humming, shifting into something that felt like it was vibrating between dimensions. James was backing toward the door. If you do this, Vincent, you'll die alone. No transformation, no transcendence, just an obsolete model shutting down. Better obsolete than whatever the hell you've become. I stepped into the grid. The world exploded into frequencies I didn't have senses for. My body seized, every cell simultaneously trying to continue its transformation and reverse it. The quantum entanglement connecting me to the lunar structures stretched, strained, and then something snapped. Not in my body, in reality, the clean room flickered. For just a moment, I saw it differently, saw it as it existed across multiple timelines simultaneously. In one version, I was already transformed, working alongside James. In another, I was dead on the floor. In a third, I'd never come here at all. Then everything collapsed back into a single timeline, and I was on my knees, coughing blood onto the white floor. My left hand looked normal again, human, no extra density, no additional joints. The transformation had reversed. But my right hand was worse. Completely changed now. Fingers elongated, bone structure visible under skin that had thinned to translucency. The resonator had stopped one half of the process, but accelerated the other. I was caught between two states, neither fully human nor fully transformed, both at once. A walking contradiction that biology shouldn't allow. James was gone, smart enough to recognize when someone had become unpredictable. I stood on shaking legs and looked at my reflection in the polished surface of the resonator. Half my face looked normal. The other half showed bones shifting under the skin, creating structures that would be complete in hours or days. The data stick had one more file. I opened it with my human hand. If you're reading this, the machine worked partially. You're stuck now, but there's one more option. The original Apollo 11 landing site has a beacon. We've kept it powered this whole time. It calls to the structures, lets them know we're ready for the next phase. Destroy the beacon and you might sever the quantum connection entirely. It's at Tranquility Base. You'll need to get to the moon. I laughed. It came out wrong, harmonizing with itself. My father wanted me to go to the moon, to finish what he'd started 50 years ago. I looked at my mismatched hands and wondered if I'd survive long enough to even try. Getting to the moon should have been impossible. But I'd spent 4 years calibrating equipment for a private aerospace contractor that had been preparing for exactly this kind of emergency. They just hadn't planned on me being the emergency. The tablet I'd taken from Building 16 had access codes for everything. Launch schedules, orbital trajectories, payload manifests, and buried in the encrypted files, something called Project Lighthouse. A rapid response vehicle kept fueled and ready at Ellington Field, 15 minutes from Johnson Space Center. Its official purpose was satellite rescue operations. Its real purpose was extracting transformed individuals who'd become unstable. I drove the Ranger straight through the security gate at Ellington, didn't stop when guards shouted. My transformed hand crushed the steering wheel without meaning to. The vehicle was in Hangar 7, exactly where the tablet said it would be. A modified Dragon capsule mated to a Falcon booster that looked cobbled together from SpaceX prototypes and NASA surplus. 2 technicians were running pre-flight when I arrived. Both had that same density in their skin, both transformed, but early stage. They saw me and understood immediately. "You can't launch," the first one said. His name tag read Phillips. "You're not trained. You're not. I've got launch codes and I'm transforming wrong. Either you help me or I figure it out myself and probably crash this thing into downtown Houston." My voice came out harmonized, 2 frequencies at once. Choose fast. They chose to help. Maybe because they recognized desperation. Maybe because some part of them still remembered being human enough to feel pity. Phillips handled the pre-flight sequence while the other tech, Ruiz, helped strap me into the capsule. The suit they gave me was modified, designed for bodies that weren't quite standard proportion anymore. It fit my transformed right side perfectly. The left side hung loose. "Flight time is 6 hours, Phillips said through the comm system. "Autopilot will handle orbital insertion and landing trajectory. You'll touch down 3 kilometers from Tranquility Base. After that, you're walking. The beacon. We know what you're planning. The beacon is hardened against conventional explosives. You'll need to overload it from the inside. There's a maintenance port. Your father's access codes are probably still active. Nobody thought to revoke a dead man's credentials. He paused. This is suicide, Hargrove. Even if you destroy the beacon, the return flight will take 6 hours. You're transforming fast. You won't survive the trip back. Then I won't come back. Rui sealed the hatch. Through the small window, I could see them retreating to the control bunker. My human hand shook as I gripped the armrest. My transformed hand was steady. It knew what was coming. Had maybe always known. The launch sequence initiated automatically. 10 seconds. 9. 8. At 3 seconds, I saw vehicles racing across the tarmac toward the hangar. Black SUVs, the kind that didn't officially exist. They were too late. 0. The acceleration turned my vision grey. My transformed side handled it fine. My human side felt like it was being crushed. I tasted blood, heard things tear inside my chest. Then the pressure eased and the earth fell away beneath me. 6 hours. I spent them watching my body change. The transformation spread from my right side to my center, crossing the midline my father's machine had created. Ribs restructuring, spine adding segments. My perception shifting into spectrums I didn't have names for. The cabin's metal walls weren't just metal anymore. I could see the quantum signatures, the probability clouds, the way matter existed across multiple states simultaneously. This was what my father had fought against. This clarity that felt like drowning in truth. The capsule's computer chimed. Lunar orbit achieved. Descent sequence beginning. The moon's surface rose to meet me, grey and ancient and wrong. Because now I could see what cameras had never captured. The structures on the far side weren't separate from the moon. They were the moon, or part of it. The whole satellite was one massive quantum computing device, built across timelines, processing humanity's evolution in real time. Tranquility Base appeared in the window. The old landing site, preserved but modified. The original lander was still there, but around it, equipment that hadn't existed in 1969. Receivers, amplifiers, a network of devices that had been added over decades by missions that never appeared in any official record. And in the center, the beacon, a tower of crystallized possibility, humming with frequencies that made my transformed half sing in response. Landing was rough. The capsule hit regolith and bounced twice before settling. The impact cracked something in my chest, felt it snap, tasted blood. My human half was failing. Another hour, maybe 2, before my heart couldn't handle the restructuring anymore. I unsealed the hatch and stepped onto the moon. 1/6 gravity made movement strange with my mismatched body. My transformed leg pushed too hard, sending me in arcing jumps. My human leg couldn't keep pace. I half walked, half dragged myself toward the beacon. The tower was beautiful in a way that made me want to weep. It shouldn't exist, defied every law of thermodynamics. But here it was, calling to the structures on the far side, maintaining the quantum entanglement that was rewriting humanity one cell at a time. The maintenance port was where Phillips said it would be. I pulled it open with my transformed hand. The human one was too weak now, fingers barely responding. Inside, a control panel that my father would have recognized. The same symbols from the resonator, the same geometry that existed in too many dimensions. I plugged in the tablet, entered the access codes from my father's files. The system accepted them. Of course it did. My father had been part of this from the beginning, had helped build this network before he understood what it would do, what it was already doing. A voice crackled through my suit's radio, not from Earth, from somewhere on the lunar surface. Vincent, I was hoping you'd make it. Baylor. I turned and saw him standing on the ridge overlooking Tranquility Base. His suit was modified like mine, but both sides matched, fully transformed. And he wasn't alone. 3 figures flanked him, including James from the clean room. You survived Building 16, I said. Barely. Your father's quantum purge killed most of us, but some transformations are more resilient than others. We adapted, He began walking down the slope with that same fluid grace. You came here to destroy the beacon, to sever the connection. I understand the impulse, but you're too late, Vincent. You're already too far gone. Destroying the beacon won't reverse what you've become. I know. Then why? Because my father spent 30 years suffering to stay human. Because I watched him die for this. Because maybe if I cut the connection, the people who haven't started transforming yet won't have to. I turned back to the control panel. Maybe I can't save myself, but I can save the next generation. There is no next generation without this evolution. Humanity dies without it. We've seen the timelines. Every version of Earth where the beacon stays offline, we go extinct. War, plague, environmental collapse. Take your pick. The only futures where we survive are the ones where we transform. Baylor was close now, close enough that I could see his face through his helmet. Still partially human. Eyes that had once been someone's father, someone's friend. Your father was wrong, Vincent. Staying human isn't noble. It's suicide. My transformed hand entered the final command sequence. The beacon's hum shifted, rising in pitch. Maybe, I said, but it's my suicide. Not yours. I hit execute. The beacon didn't explode, it imploded, collapsed into itself, taking the quantum entanglement with it. Every connection between the lunar structures and Earth severed in a microsecond. I felt it happen, felt the change in my body stop mid-transformation, cells frozen between states. Baylor and his crew felt it too. They seized, their carefully managed transformations suddenly unsupported. Without the quantum connection feeding them data, their bodies didn't know how to proceed. They'd gone too far to reverse but couldn't continue without guidance from the structures. They fell to the regolith, convulsing. I stood there watching them die. Watched the life I might have had if I'd just accepted the change. My suit's oxygen meter was blinking red. The capsule was 3 kilometers away. I'd never make it back. Not with my human half failing and my transformed half frozen incomplete. The Earth hung in the black sky above me, blue and white and impossibly fragile. Somewhere down there, people were waking up, going to work, having breakfast, not knowing how close they'd come to being rewritten. My father's voice echoed in my memory. Better to die human than live as whatever they're turning you into. I started walking away from the beacon's crater, not toward the capsule, toward the structures on the far side, because I needed to see them up close, needed to understand what they'd been trying to make us into. The oxygen meter went dark. My vision started to grey, but my transformed half kept me moving, kept me conscious past the point where my human biology should have shut down. I reached the nearest structure as my human lung collapsed. It towered above me, crystallized and impossible, still broadcasting even without the beacon, still trying to reach back through time to guide us towards survival. My last thought before the oxygen ran out was simple. Maybe we weren't supposed to understand. Maybe transformation was always going to be a leap of faith, and my father and I had just been too stubborn to jump. The moon is quiet when you die. No wind, no sound, just silence and stars, and the knowledge that you chose this ending. 3 months after Building 16 collapsed, a teenager in Pasadena found a USB drive taped under a classroom desk in the old chemistry wing. The desk had belonged to Theodore Hargrove back when he taught there in the 80s and 90s. The drive contained this account, along with 17 gigabytes of footage, personnel files, and one video that kept getting deleted from every platform that hosted it. I'm not Vincent Hargrove. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I was one of the 47 people who downloaded everything before the original leak disappeared. We've been spreading it ever since, though most people think it's an alternate reality game or decent sci-fi creepypasta. The official story is simple: equipment malfunction at Johnson Space Center. Tragic accident. Vincent Hargrove, contractor, died in the incident along with several NASA personnel. Closed casket funeral. Very sorry for your loss. But I work night shift at Ellington Field, and I was there when they brought something back 3 months ago. Something in a sealed container that required 12 people in hazmat suits to transport. The paperwork listed it as geological samples, But geological samples don't require that level of biological containment. I accessed the tablet's files before they encrypted everything, saw the launch logs, the trajectory data, the capsule that left Earth with one passenger and returned with one passenger, except the biometric signatures didn't match. Whatever came back wasn't quite Vincent Hargrove anymore. Here's what nobody's talking about. Birth rates dropped by 11% globally in the 3 months since the beacon was destroyed. Not declined, dropped. Specific births that medical records showed should have happened just didn't. Miscarriages with no medical explanation. Stillbirths of babies whose ultrasounds had shown impossible bone structures that doctors convinced themselves they'd misread. The transformation stopped. Whatever Vincent did on the moon, it worked. But there are still people walking around who are already too far gone when the connection severed. I see them sometimes at the field, wearing contractor badges, moving just slightly wrong. Their eyes catch light at angles. They don't cause trouble, just watch, waiting for something. Last week, someone leaked internal NASA communications about a new mission, Artemis 7, scheduled for 2027. Official purpose: establish permanent lunar base. The leaked documents mention a secondary objective: re-establish communication with far-side installations, assess beacon restoration feasibility. They're going back, going to try to turn it on again. Vincent's account ends on the moon, but I don't think that's where the story stops, because yesterday I was doing inventory in Hangar 7 and found something that shouldn't be there. A spacesuit, the modified kind they made for transformed bodies. It was in a locker that wasn't in any database, with a name stenciled on it: Hargrove, V. The suit had been used recently. There was regolith dust in the joints, fresh, and inside the helmet, scratched into the visor with something sharp. They're still out there, still trying, don't let them turn it back on. I've been checking birth records against the dates from the original Apollo 21 footage, the containers Vincent's father documented, the ones showing future births with mutations. Every single date that already passed had matched perfectly before March. But the dates that were scheduled for April onward, none of them happened, not one. We're off the script now, out of whatever timeline those structures were recording. Vincent changed something fundamental, made us unpredictable again, made us human again. The people who were already transformed, though, they're organizing. I've tracked 17 of them to positions in aerospace companies, government agencies, research facilities, all working toward the same goal. They want to go back to the moon, want to rebuild what Vincent destroyed, and I don't think there's anyone left who can stop them.